Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the National Wireless Safety Alliance's webinar, A Guide to Setting Up Your NWSA Practical Test Site. This webinar is the second of a three-part webinar series focusing on key steps and processes associated with establishing and administering the certification program's field-based practical exams. My name is Shelley Trigo, and I'm the Executive Administrator for National Wireless Safety Alliance. If you have any questions regarding the information presented during today's webinar, please feel free to contact NWSA. We'll have that contact information available at the end of today's presentation. We'll have a question and answer session as time allows at the end of the presentation. You can submit your questions during the webinar via the question chat box. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter, Clint Cook. Clint is NWSA's Practical Examiner Accreditation Program Instructor. As a PEEP workshop instructor, Clint brings his experience as a tower hand, foreman, manager, and safety director to the table. Clint served on the Telecommunications Tower Technician Task Force, which played a key role in developing the T1 and T2 certification programs. Clint also serves as the chairman of NWSA's Practical Exam Management Committee. With that, I'll turn things over to Clint.
Thanks, Shelley. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming in to take this webinar. It's going to be a good guide to how you can set up your NWSA practical test sites for just the T1 and T2. We won't be going through every minute detail of what wrench and things like that you'll need, but I'll reference you where you can get the exact information. So it's going to be a good overview for you guys. A few of the things that we're going to talk about today during this webinar is how to apply to be a test site, what are the site setup duties for the Test Site Coordinator and the Practical Examiner. Those are both two important roles that can be fulfilled by the same person, but are often two different individuals. So we'll go through what the duties are for each of those. We'll look at the test site criteria, what the requirements are for the facilities, the tower specifications, the tools and materials required for each exam, and then we'll go through an outline for both the T1 and the T2 site setup, as they are a little bit different. Again, if you guys have questions, you can submit those on the online box there to Shelley, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. So just as an introduction here to the test site, there's a few important things to remember. First and foremost, that these test sites are an important part of the NWSA program. Without good test sites, we can't administer good exams, so it's crucial that we have test sites set up properly within the right specs. Proper facility specifications and site setup standards ensure both reliable and accurate exams. Those are both important concepts that we talk about in practical exam workshops, and they also apply to the test site. If test sites aren't set up the same way, they're not reliable, then the exams can be more difficult or less difficult at one facility or the other, and we want to try and eliminate that. So it's very important that they're all set up the same. To ensure that, test sites must be set up in accordance with all site criteria prior to commencing practical exam. You don't want to find out partway through an exam that you neglected to set something up properly. In order to do that, we use the site setup instructions and the site reports to ensure proper equipment and the setup. So those are both documents within the Practical Test Site Coordinator Handbook that you'll want to be very familiar with, both as a test site coordinator and as a practical examiner. The site setup instructions go line by line on how to set things up, and then the site report is what you use to actually verify that it's been done properly. You must always have a properly filled out site report before starting examinations. So this is just a couple pages out of the Practical Test Site Coordinator Handbook. There's a lot of different things in there. On the right is the first page of the test site setup instructions for the Tower Technician 1. You can see it just goes through step by step. Once you're familiar with setting up a site, you don't necessarily have to follow these line by line. But for people that are newer to the process, I recommend just going through one by one and following the instructions, and it should lead you through it pretty simply. On the left side is just an example page of a site report. These are 3 or 4 page documents that have check boxes for every material, every tool, everything that you need to make sure that the site has been set up properly. These are crucial, and again, they must be filled out before starting the exams. So that's just an example. You can see it goes through every tool that you need in a specific size, every different material has its own checkbox, so there's no reason to miss anything. You just go through line by line before each exam session and check it off. It's a great tool to really double check yourself. I've given a lot of these exams, and I still use both these documents every time to make sure it's set up properly. So before you can set up your test site, you need to become a test site. The first webinar in this series, Hosting Your Own NWSA Practical Examinations, goes into this in greater detail, so I'd encourage you to reference that for a more detailed discussion on how to get set up as a test site. But the basic steps are to first download the Practical Test Site Coordinator Handbook, determine who's going to be your designated test site coordinator. Ideally, that's somebody that's located at that facility that has the ability to get everything set up and manage that test site. So think about who your test site coordinator would be. Once you've designated that person, you need to complete the test site application and the test site coordinator agreement. Both of those are in the test site coordinator handbook, and email those to pe@nws-a.org, and they will process it. Once you send in those applications and agreements, you want to go ahead and source and build your test site kit. Depending on what you have already in your warehouse, you may have a large percentage of the materials, but a lot of folks need to piece things together. And while some distributors are offering test kits at this point, it's common you might have to get one thing from one place and then another, especially when you're looking at the guy wire materials for the T2. So give yourself some time to source and build that test site kit, because it can take a few weeks to get all the parts. Sometimes things get back ordered or they send you the wrong part, so it's important to make sure you've got everything correct. Once you've got all your parts, then you can go ahead and set up your test site and be ready to test. So as far as the test site setup responsibilities, again, there's 2 people that play a key role there. One is the test site coordinator, and the other is the practical examiner. In many instances, they may be the same person, but they're not required to be the same person, and they have separate duties and responsibilities for each of those positions. So first, we'll talk about the test site coordinator. It's the TSC's requirement or responsibility to fill out and send in the test site application and get approved as a test site. The test site coordinator provides the test site facilities, the tower, all the materials, and all the tools in accordance with the test site criteria. All those lists and everything are public knowledge, so there's nothing confidential in those. It should be easy for you to get all that together based on those documents. It's also the test site coordinator's responsibility to set up the test site in accordance with those setup instructions in the site report. So before the practical examiner arrives for examinations, it's the TSC's responsibility to already have everything set up. There may be small tweaks or adjustments that need to be made by the practical examiner upon the final inspection, but the site should be set up by the site coordinator prior to exam. And then it's also the test site coordinator's responsibility to coordinate with candidates regarding testing requirements, equipment questions, and scheduling. Generally, the practical examiner does not handle the scheduling and correspondence with individuals taking the exams. That's up to the test site coordinator. So basically, all the front-end things are up to the test site coordinator. But the practical examiner does have some duties. There are things that only the practical examiner can do that must be done prior to exam starting. First and foremost, the practical examiner needs to order score sheets at least 2 weeks prior. Only practical examiners can order score sheets, so it's their responsibility to make sure that they've done that and they have adequate score sheets if the exam is going to be conducted. They also need to submit the intent to test form at least 2 days prior. So if a practical examiner is giving exams During the workshop, they were shown how to go on to the website and submit this intent to test form at least 2 days prior. We need that notification to know when exams are going on so that we can audit if necessary. More advanced notice is great. We love knowing ahead of time. 2 days is just the bare minimum to be able to do it. So that's an important element of the practical examiner responsibilities. They also need to bring all the required PE materials to the test site. There's a variety of materials that are confidential, and only the practical examiner has access to these. Things like the verbatim instructions, laminated instruction sheets for the different exams, as well as examiner PPE and tools. They know what they need to bring, and their requirement to bring all that stuff because the test site coordinator will not have those proprietary materials. Only the PEs get to see those. So they need to make sure that they're going to bring those. Once they're at the site, preferably the day before exams are going to begin, it's the PE's responsibility to verify that the site has been set up properly and then complete the site report. So the site report verifies all the setup conditions, materials and tools are present, everything's ready to go. A rescue plan, hazard analysis, all those steps that the PE has been trained to do are on the site report, and that needs to be completed before any exams start. Never should an exam be conducted without a site report being completely filled out and available there. So those are the requirements for the test site coordinators and the practical examiners, how to get that site set up. Next, we're going to talk about the test site facility criteria. Exams can be done indoors or outdoors. The majority of them are done indoors, and it tends to work out a little bit better for obvious reasons with weather and conditions and things like that. But regardless of which exam you're giving, there's a few things you need to think about and make sure that your facility can meet those requirements. First of all would be a candidate waiting area. You need to have some location where the candidates will be greeted and waiting prior to their exams beginning. That needs to be outside of the exam area, not somewhere that they will be able to watch exams going on. Within that candidate area, you would want to have a few things. You would want to have their candidate applications for them to be able to fill out that captures all their information as well as the payment information for the exam. You want to have a copy of the candidate handbook, as well as any instruction manuals associated with the different exams. For the T2, you would want to have the guy wire instructions, the capstan manual, a couple things like that available so that they could review them as well as the handbook while they're waiting to do their exam. So important to have a good candidate waiting area. You also want to have the overall testing area. So whether the warehouse or shop location, the training area, where your towers are. You want that area to be free from hazards, distractions, and spectators. So basically, you don't want that going on in the middle of a busy warehouse with forklifts running around or other activities going on that might create a hazard or a distraction, and you want that area to be free from spectators who may be watching the exam. So think about where your overall testing area is and how you can best set that up to be a designated testing area without anything else going on. There are tower requirements. You want to make sure that you meet those specific requirements, which we'll get into in depth here in just a moment. And generally, you want that tower to be representative of a common tower type. So when somebody looks at it, you want to think it looks like a cell phone tower. We'll get into the specific requirements. It should have suitable anchorages, right? Because they're going to be climbing on there with their shock absorbing lanyards. So it needs to be able to protect well using those lanyards. Depending on the tower type, you may need to put a strap or things like that in place. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But it should be representative of a common tower type, not something off the wall. And it needs to be set up properly for each exam type administered. There's a little bit difference between the hoisting system and things like that between the T1 and the T2, so you want to refer to the specific directions for each one. And then also you need to make sure that the facility has all the proper materials and tools as specified on the site reports for the exams being administered. So those are the basic requirements. Most shops and warehouses and things that I've been to meet those. Occasionally they need to be finessed a little bit to have a better overall testing area. but those are the basic requirements for the facilities. Now let's talk about the tower specifications for both the T1 and T2 towers. The towers themselves are the same, though they will be set up a little bit differently for the two exams. But the basic specifications are as follows. Towers can be indoor or outdoor. An indoor facility is great. You can look over at the photo there and see this facility is a great dedicated training facility, and it's got a number of different types of towers on it. All the ones in this picture do meet these specs and could be used for the exam, but think about which ones you use. So indoor or outdoor, there's a minimum of 15 feet height. That's just the shortest tower we can allow to allow for enough headroom for the two-part hoisting systems, the SRDs, all the devices. So minimum 15 feet, although 20 feet is recommended. It tends to make things a little bit easier. A minimum 18-inch face width. So from outside to outside of the legs, it should be at least 18 inches wide. The leg size of the tower should be between 1 inch and 5 inches. That's to accommodate a specific T1 mount that will only fit those leg sizes. They can be round or angle legs, and the tower can be either straight or tapered. The beauty of the T1 mount kit is that it does fit a large variety of different towers, but those are the main characteristics. It needs to have 1 to 5 inch leg size, round or angle, can be straight or tapered section. It also needs to be a 3 or 4 leg lattice structure type. So basically representative of a guy tower section or some sort of self-supporting tower. No monopoles. It was determined that monopoles were a significantly different type of structure for climbing on, and thus were not really reliable and compatible with the exam. So at this point, it's just lattice structures. Obviously, the tower needs to be well secured to the ground and suitable for climbing. We don't require an engineering report, but we do require, and it will be up to the practical examiner's discretion, whether or not that is anchored well enough and suitable for climbing on. Obviously, safety is first and foremost during this exam, so the structure needs to be rock solid. As well, it should provide adequate anchorage points and climbing facilities. So depending on the tower type you have, it needs to be able to be protected with Y lanyards, right? We're not going to be using a safety climb on it or a vertical lifeline, so it needs to provide adequate anchorages for their energy absorbing lanyards, as well as positioning devices. It should be fairly easy to climb. It doesn't have to have a designated ladder, though on sometimes with larger self-supports, the climbing can be a little bit trickier. So think about your tower and try to make it easy to climb on with adequate anchorage points for a reliable exam site. So those are the basic tower specs for both the T1 and T2 test towers. Make sure that your test towers meet all those. Measure the leg size. Some people sometimes get a little surprised by how big their leg size is. These are some common indoor tower types used. Again, towers can be indoor or outdoor for exams. Indoor tends to be a little bit nicer with the weather and things like that. So some common ones that I've seen giving exams around the country. What I think works the absolute best for the exam is a 20-foot tall, 3-foot face, 2-inch round leg, straight guy tower section. So basically just a standard 3-foot wide guy tower section tends to work really well for this exam, as well as basic training of tower tech. It's a very common one that I've seen in different facilities, and it works really well. The benefits of the guy tower section are they're readily available on the used market. They're pretty easy to find sections like this around the country available without great cost. They're easy to install, generally just bolting them to the ground and then connecting them somehow to the rafter or ceiling joist or something like that creates a very robust climbing tower. They take up a lot of space and they offer good anchorage points. So that's a great option. Other things that work well, a 15 to 20 foot tall, 18-inch face, 1 1/4 round leg. This is commonly known as like a Roan 35 section, and that's pretty much the smallest tower section type that you can use that will meet all the specs. A Roan 25 is too narrow. A Roan 35 is just right at 18 inches, and I have done exams on there. The advantages of that are that they're inexpensive, and again, they're easy to install, but they're a little bit more limited on anchorages. In general, on that, the only appropriate anchorage points is the leg itself. So it can be a good option if you already have that, but think about how well that might work with your existing training programs as well. Another common one are bigger self-support sections, again, between 15 and 20 feet tall. And I've worked on ones ranging from 48 inches all the way to 90-inch faces, so they could be a fairly large face that you're working on. Oftentimes with the self-support, you're climbing on the leg itself as opposed to the face of the tower, which can make it a little bit trickier to operate some of the tasks, but it seems to work out just fine. Generally, these larger self-support sections have a 3 to 5 inch round or angle leg with some sort of angle bracing. Oftentimes, to make these suitable for climbing, they need to have pegs on the leg. Sometimes there's the ladder installed on one of the self-support faces close to the leg where they'll be mounting the antenna and things. So just think about how it's set up, suitable for climbing. Occasionally, if the leg is too big for their anchors, for their Y lanyards, you need to install some straps that are accordingly places so that they have ways to properly climb the tower, not out climbing the lanyards, things like that. So think about where your anchorage points are. In general, these tend to be the trickiest for candidates to climb properly, only because of the locations of anchorages, the way that they may have to climb angle bracing or the leg. It can present unique problems, none of which can't be handled by the practical examiner and result in good, reliable, and accurate exams. So again, these are just 3 common indoor ones. As long as your tower meets those specs laid out, it's fine to use. These are just some common ones that I've seen doing workshops around the country. Now we're going to look specifically at Triple T1 tower materials and tools needed. We're not going to go through the minutia of every wrench and material needed. I'm going to refer you to the Practical Test Site Coordinator Handbook and the site reports to look at all that. And you'll want to follow the detailed site setup instructions in the handbook, because they'll go through step by step where to put this piece of material, how to set up this part of the tower. We're just going to go through a little outline here to familiarize you all with the different major parts. So first, for the Triple T1, you'd want to set up the tower. It needs to have a self-retracting device with a maximum 36-inch arresting distance. Obviously, people will be working fairly close to the ground in these, and we want SRDs that stop pretty quickly. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Class A. What we're looking for is a 36-inch arresting distance. There's a variety of them on the market that work well. Balltech and some others make some small webbing ones with, a 11-foot or 15-foot cable or webbing length on them with a 36-inch arresting distance, which are an inexpensive option that work well in the training environment. There are other larger ones that work well. You need to have a 2-part hoisting system with progress capture. So during the Triple T1, the majority of test sites hoist the antenna using a hand hauling system, and the 2-part system makes that easier. We do allow for a 1-part system with a capstan hoist if you prefer to do that. Just refer to the site setup instructions and site reports for how that needs to be rigged. But in general, the 2-part hoisting system with some sort of progress capture, so that if the examiner were to let go of the rope, the antenna wouldn't fall to the ground. There's a number of ways that could be rigged using different devices. You want to make sure you can't drop that antenna if you let go. You will install a simulated feed line, basically just a simulation of a hard line on the tower. That can be 1/2 inch, 1 5 inch, doesn't really matter as long as it's got 7/16 in female connector at the top to make the jumper connection. And then at 8 feet, you're going to mark the leg of the tower that the antenna will be installed on with a piece of tape so that the center line is easily identified, and label it as 208 feet. Again, we're simulating these activities at a height, so marking it at 208 reminds the candidate that they are at a higher elevation. Other task materials and things that you need for the Triple T1, you need a 4-foot antenna. That can be between 42 and 60 inches, so approximately a 4-foot antenna. Doesn't matter how many ports it has, but it does need to have a down tilt bracket. Mechanical down tilt is part of the exam, how to set that. So you need to make sure that you have a down tilt bracket on that antenna. There are more specific specs that will refer you to the Site Coordinator Handbook for what they are as far as width, depth, weight, etc. You also need to have the Triple T1 antenna mount from Perfect 10 Wireless. This can only be ordered from Perfect 10 Wireless with either a site number or a practical exam number. They're not available to the public, nor can you build your own mount. It needs to be the exact mount with all the parts from Perfect 10. You'll also need a 6-foot, 1/2-inch coax jumper with 7/16 DIN male connectors. We will be installing a jumper on the tower, and it needs to be a 6-footer. As far as setting up the workstations for the T1, we have 2 tables. You can see the photo here behind us, how we've got the test tower set up with the 2-part hoisting system. And then you can also see the weatherproofing skeleton in the left corner, the antenna table, or table 1, there on the left, and then to the gentleman's right, table 2. That can be a variety of things. They can be simple folding tables. Some people like a rolling workbench with shadow box places for all their tools. Up to you how detailed you'd like to make that. On table 1, you're going to have the antenna mount instructions. Again, the PE will bring those. That's a confidential document. You'll have all the antenna mount parts for them to choose. No matter what type of tower you're putting the antenna mount on, you want to put all the parts out so that they have to select the right part. And then you'll also put the antenna and the pipe either on or next to that table. It's nice for them to have enough room on that table to actually put the antenna on the table to work on instead of having to be on the ground. Next to that, table 2, you'll lay out all your tools exactly as specified on the site report. We need to have the exact right number and types of wrenches, nut drivers, screwdrivers, tape measure, etc. No more and no less. Exactly the tools outlined on that site report. Having too many creates a cluttered workspace. Having not enough creates, a problem with the test site not being the same as another one. So exactly as specified on the site report. Same with the jumper support materials. You don't want to have just a pile of different jumper support materials. You need to have the designated types and quantities, things like standoffs, hose clamps, snap-ins, and butterflies. Again, refer to the site report for the exact quantities of those. You also need a hoist bucket. And then also you'll have your weatherproofing station with the skeleton and the materials and everything like that set up. Next, the Triple T2 tower materials and tools. The tower setup is a little bit differently, but most of the same things are there. You need to have that SRG set up with the maximum 36-inch resting distance. You need to have the top block and the hoist rope properly rigged. So there's a number of rigging exercises in the Triple T2, but we will install the top block and the hoist rope already. So again, refer to the setup instructions and site reports for how to do that. Also for the Triple T2, you need to install the guide pull-off lug at the 10-foot mark on the appropriate tower leg, and then also a guide ground anchor 10 to 15 feet out from the tower leg. So that's where they'll make the connections from the guy wire from the tower down to the ground. So those need to be installed properly on the right tower leg. You also need to have a simulated load, a hoist bucket with 50 pounds in it, a 50-pound sandbag, some weights, something like that. You also need to either have a ground-mounted or a truck-mounted AV Chance Series 90 swivel capstan with the rope bar and the rope lock installed. So depending on your facility, it may be easiest for you to just back a truck in or to create some sort of ground anchor for that swivel mount to go into simulating the receiver of a truck. Again, we require an 80 chance Series 90. It must be that type of capstan. That was determined to be the most prevalent in the industry today. And in the sake of reliability, we chose to go with that specific one. Again, it needs to have a safety rope bar as well as the rope lock installed. It needs to have both those elements to satisfy the requirements so that they can use it the same from exam to exam. And then you also need to have your guy wire strands laid out neatly near the exam. Try not to put them somewhere that people are going to trip over them or they're going to be a hazard, but you don't want them too far away from the exam site either. As far as the T2 Workstation, in general, you just need one table, although you can certainly have two if needed. On that table, you're going to have all your rigging task materials, things like slings, shackles, and the block for doing their different rigging tasks. Again, you would have exactly what's specified on the site report, no more, no less. You'd want to have all your capstan equipment, the required extension cords, the foot pedal, and a portable GSTI. Again, refer to the Practical Test Site Coordinator Handbook and the site report for exact quantities, lengths, and types. You would also want to have your guy wire components, things like turnbuckles, dead ends, thimbles, and shackles in the proper types, sizes, and quantities. All the different tools required, as well as the instructions, drawings, and user manuals for the T2. So you can see in the photo to the right there, we have an examiner acting as the tag man during a rigging exercise. You can see the table set up in the background and the rope going out of view to the capstan. So it's all set up in a nice, tight, clean area without hazards, things like that. So those are the basics of setting up the T2 Workstation. Again, the specific directions are in the Site Coordinator Handbook. So in summary, for setting up your test sites, you want to make sure that you complete your test site registration well in advance. The minimum is 2 weeks prior, but I would give yourself much more time to get all your documentation in, and especially to source and build your facility. Make sure that your facility and your tower meet the specs. You need to go out and measure and make sure that it actually is suitable for the exam. You want to source and build those site kits and workstations well in advance of the exam date. Again, it can take quite a bit of time to get together every tool, piece of material, guy wire things. So give yourself plenty of time so you're not stressing out as the exam date approaches. Always follow the site setup instructions. Those are laid out to make it easier for you and a simple way to set up the exam site. So make sure you use those setup instructions. And then always verify proper setup prior to exams using the site report. I can't stress that enough, how important it is to use the site report so that you don't forget anything and that is completed all the way finished before you start exam. You don't want to get into exam and realize partway you didn't have something because you didn't complete the site report. Very important that site reports are done before exams begin. If you have any questions about site setup, you're welcome to email me directly at clint.cook@nws-a.org. I tend to have the most familiarity with setting up the sites, having done many exams at this point, and should be able to help answer any questions that relate to your specific facility or how to set things up. You can also obviously email the PE@nws-a.org with questions as well, but I'm happy to field them personally too. Some different resources for the test site coordinators, obviously the Test Site Coordinator Handbook, the Candidate Handbook, the weatherproofing skeleton drawing, the site reports, and the PE for hire listing. These are all important things that a test site coordinator might want while setting up their test site. Very important, again, you've got to have a practical examiner figured out, have those site reports, get your weatherproofing skeleton built, and make sure you're very familiar with the two handbooks. These are some different points of contact for different things. Again, I'm the Practical Examiner Accreditation Program Instructor, so I can answer questions as far as site setup and things like that. And then other individuals, Aaron Jones, Janelle Shaw, are both tied to the Practical Examiner program. Jacqueline tends to handle all the applications and score sheets and things like that. And then Shelley is the Executive Administrator. So depending on what question you have, you may want to contact any one of us five. There's some upcoming NWSA webinars. I'll be doing another one on how to become a practical examiner on August 1st. So if you're interested in becoming an NWSA practical examiner, you can attend that webinar. We have 4 webinars being developed. And if there's anything that you'd like to hear more about, feel free to let us know, and we can address that in a different webinar. If you come up with questions after this webinar, you're able to submit them to the PE email address there shown, and we will get a response back to you. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Shelley, and she can read off any questions that we've got so far, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thanks, Clint. Yeah, we've gotten a couple of questions here. The first one is, can the same person play the role of Test Site Coordinator and Practical Examiner, or does it have to be 2 separate people?
That's a great question, Shelley. It's a little bit confusing. It can be the same person, and I actually recommend that it is the same person if possible. Again, the Practical Examiner will go through a 3-day Practical Examiner Accreditation Program workshop where they'll have the chance to set up sites, use the site reports. They'll be the most familiar with the site setup, and so it's great if they can be the Test Site Coordinator, but we recognize that that's not always the case, that a Test Site Coordinator may be an individual at a company or a training facility that's not a practical examiner. They may be bringing in an outside practical examiner, and that's fine. They should just be able to set up the site and have everything ready for when the practical examiner shows up. So they can be 2 separate people, or they can be the same. My recommendation is that they are the same, but they don't have to be.
Great, thanks. Okay. Another question. Can I use my own antenna mount for TT1, or do I have to order it from Perfect 10 Wireless?
It does have to be the specific T1 mount from Perfect 10. The instructions and everything are set up with that exact mount. During the task force, we test drove many different mounts from the available on the general market. And the problem with some of those, while they were universal and met the different tower requirements, they tended to be quite heavy and more difficult to put together, took longer. So we created this specific mount to address certain skill sets within the Tower Technician 1 level, and also be suitable for a lot of different tower types out there. So yes, it does have to be the exact mount from Perfect 10 Wireless.
Okay, thank you. One more question. Is it okay to use a pegboard hanging on the wall behind the table, number 2, for the tools?
Absolutely. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a table for the tools. That's just the simplest thing. Personally, what I have at my exam facility is a roll-out Husky workbench that I can keep my spare materials and things inside. And it's all set up with a pegboard in the back where I have a shadow box, so I know exactly where every tool goes. It makes it very easy for me to reset between exams and know that I got the wrenches back from technicians' tool bags and things like that. But however you want to set it up for you is just fine. A pegboard hanging on the fence or on the wall behind a table is a great way to keep things organized. So I recommend that, but again, it can just be laid out on a table as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I believe that's all the time we have for today. So thank you, Clint, and thank you, everybody, for your time today. Wanted to mention that this webinar, you can find it on our website. If you go to the Events tab, there's a drop-down, and if you choose Past Webinars, we will have this one posted in the next couple days, and also our previous ones can be found there as well. Thanks, everybody, and hope you all have a great day and a great week. Bye-bye.